You can love someone and still feel completely alone. This is marriage wisdom for those who want a long marriage. If that is you, listen to me and stay to the end. And that is one of the hardest things to explain, because from the outside, everything looks fine. You're together, you're functioning. Life is moving forward. Bills are getting paid. Responsibilities are being handled. Y'all are showing up for life the way you're supposed to. From the outside, it doesn't look like anything is missing. And sometimes, that's exactly why it takes so long to recognize what you're actually feeling. Because you're not looking at a situation that looks broken. You're looking at something that looks stable. And you start questioning yourself. Why do I feel like something is off if everything looks okay? Why do I feel this way when nothing bad is happening? Why can't I just be satisfied with what I have? And those questions, they don't come from a place of being ungrateful. They come from a place of something inside you recognizing that something emotional is not landing the way it needs to. Because you can be present in a relationship and still feel like you're by yourself inside of it. You can sit next to someone, talk to them, live life with them, and still feel like there's a part of you that is not being reached. And that feeling doesn't show up loud. It doesn't come in yelling. It doesn't come in arguments. A lot of times, it shows up in silence. It shows up in moments where you stop explaining things. Moments where you say, it's fine, when it's really not. Moments where you feel something, but you don't even have the energy to try to explain it anymore. And you start adjusting little by little. You start pulling back just a little. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way anybody would notice right away, but in a quiet way. You start keeping more to yourself. You start processing things alone. You start handling your emotions by yourself, even though you're in a relationship. And that's where that loneliness starts to grow. Because loneliness in a relationship doesn't mean you don't have someone. It means you don't feel connected to the someone you have in the way you need to. And that's a different kind of loneliness. Because when you're alone by yourself, at least you understand why. But when you're with someone and still feel alone, that's confusing. Because you start asking yourself questions you don't have answers to. What changed? When did this start? Was it always like this and I just didn't notice? Or did something shift over time? And the truth is, most of the time, it doesn't come from one big moment. It comes from accumulation, small things, repeated over time. Moments where something mattered to you, but it didn't get acknowledged the way you needed. Moments where you tried to express something, but it didn't fully land. Moments where you needed comfort, but got logic instead. Moments where you needed presence, but got distraction instead. And none of those moments by themselves seem big enough to cause a problem. But when they stack up, they start to create distance. Not loud distance, quiet distance. The kind of distance that shows up in how you feel not necessarily in what you say, because you may still be talking, still laughing, still doing life, but inside you feel a shift. And that shift is what a lot of people don't know how to name, because it's not hate, it's not anger, it's not even that the love is gone. It's that the connection doesn't feel the same. And when connection changes, everything feels different. Even if nothing on the outside has changed, even if love is still there, even if commitment is still there, even if both people are still showing up every day. Because connection is what makes a relationship feel alive. And when that starts to fade, you feel it. Even if you can't explain it. Even if you can't prove it. Even if you don't have the words for it. You feel it. And that's where the confusion really starts. Because now you're trying to figure out what to do with a feeling you can't clearly define. Do you bring it up? Do you leave it alone? Do you wait and see if it passes? Do you question yourself? Do you push it down? And a lot of times, people choose to push it down because it feels easier than trying to explain something that doesn't have a clear explanation. And that's how it quietly grows. Because anything that is felt but not addressed doesn't disappear. It settles. And over time, it builds. And when something settles like that, it doesn't just sit there. It starts to change how you show up without you even realizing it. It starts to change how you respond, how you communicate, how open you are, how much of yourself you actually bring into the relationship. Because when you feel like something isn't being received, you naturally start protecting yourself. Not on purpose, not as a decision, but as a response. You start saying less. Not because you don't have anything to say, but because you don't feel like explaining it. You start expecting less. Not because you don't want more, but because you don't want to be disappointed. You start handling more on your own, emotionally, mentally, internally. And from the outside, it still looks like everything is fine. But inside, you are slowly becoming more alone in a relationship you're still in. And that's where resentment begins. Not loud, not dramatic, not explosive, quiet. Because resentment doesn't always start with anger. It starts with unmet needs that were never addressed. It starts with feelings that were never fully understood. It starts with moments that mattered but were brushed past. And over time, those things don't just disappear. They turn into distance. And that distance, if it's not recognized, it grows. Because now you're not just dealing with loneliness, you're dealing with disconnection. And disconnection changes everything. It changes how you hear each other. It changes how you interpret things. It changes how you respond to each other. Because when you feel disconnected, everything feels a little heavier. Conversations feel shorter. Patience feels thinner. Understanding feels harder. And now, you're not just feeling alone. You're starting to feel tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of trying. Tired of feeling like something is missing, but not knowing how to fix it. And that's the part people don't talk about enough, because they either talk about relationships that are good or relationships that are clearly broken. But this space right here, where things are not broken, but they don't feel right, that space gets ignored. And that's where a lot of long relationships sit at some point. Not broken, not over, but needing attention. And that's the part that matters. Because feeling this way doesn't automatically mean something is over. It means something needs to be looked at. Something needs to be understood. Something needs to be communicated. Because loneliness in a relationship is not always an ending. A lot of times, it's a signal. A signal that something emotional is not being met. A signal that something needs to be said. A signal that something needs to be reconnected. But if that signal is ignored, that's when things shift in a way that's harder to come back from. Because now, it's not just about the feeling. It's about the pattern that develops from the feeling. The silence. The distance. The emotional separation. And that's what builds over time if it's not addressed. And this is where the real decision comes in. Because now you have to decide what you're going to do with what you're feeling. Because once you recognize it, you can't unsee it. You can't unfeel it. And now the question becomes, do I ignore this or do I understand it? Do I keep adjusting or do I start expressing? Do I stay quiet or do I speak up in a way that can actually be heard? And that's where growth happens. Not in pretending everything is fine, but in being honest about what you're feeling, without turning it into blame, without turning it into attack, without turning it into something that pushes the other person away. Because the goal is not to tear down the relationship. The goal is to understand what's happening inside of it. To say, this is how I've been feeling. This is what's been missing for me. This is where I feel disconnected. Not to accuse, but to open the door. Because connection is not automatic. It requires attention. It requires effort. It requires intention from both people. And when both people are willing to look at it, to talk about it, to understand it, that connection can be restored. Even after seasons of feeling alone. Even after distance has built. Even after things have felt off for a while. because long marriages are not built on never having these moments. They are built on recognizing them and choosing not to ignore them, choosing to communicate, choosing to understand, choosing to reconnect. And that doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small ways, consistent ways, intentional ways. And that's the part people don't always see, because they think strong relationships are the ones that never struggle. But that's not true. Strong relationships are the ones that don't ignore what needs attention. And that is the difference. Because feeling alone in a relationship doesn't always mean you are alone. Sometimes it means something inside the relationship needs to be seen, needs to be heard, needs to be understood. And when it is, that's when things begin to shift. That's when connection starts to come back. That's when the relationship begins to feel like a relationship again. And that is how long marriages are built.